Hello and welcome. I'm Psychic Medium Roberto and I hope you're well today. In today's case, I'm going to be looking at Karlie, and I've actually put this under the category of true crime and not missing. And you'll see why in a few minutes. Now, Karlie went missing supposedly on October the 13th, 2018, and she was based in California. And all right, so let me take a moment to tune in and focus. All right, let's begin. So who was Karlie? Karlie was 16 at the time of the incident, and she was born on May the 13th, 2002. She was a 4 life path, and now what's interesting about 4s, yes, they will endure much abuse and that kind of thing in their life, but what I'd like to focus on this time is the 4s are very close-knit people. They have a very tight-knit friendship circle, and to get into that friendship circle will take years because they are that kind of people. They are not very trusting, but once you become a friend with a 4 life path, you are pretty much friends for life unless there's a major incident. So Karlie would experience difficulties with regards to going through life that we see in the 5, and that creates a lot of difficulties, and that's also would bring in the elements of drug use, drug abuse, recreational drugs. I wouldn't say she was a drug addict by any means, not at all, but more recreational. And yeah, I would just, the sense when I was meditating on this case, and I have been looking at this case for a few days now, just to make 100% sure what I was picking up. Not so much psychically, but in the numbers. What I'm seeing in the numbers on the day that she went missing doesn't add up to what the father was saying, nor the stepmother was saying, nor the eyewitnesses that reportedly saw Karlie that morning. In my opinion, and I will show it, I dispute the fact that she actually left the house that morning. In my opinion, she never left the house. Something happened inside the house that was traumatic for everyone. Of course, we know she had had a bit of a bad episode with supposedly marijuana that was spiked. I kept on asking, what was spiked in that marijuana that caused it to go like this? And I believe there was something similar to, or relevant or similar to PCP, or that level of chemical disruption to the system. And we know that PCP is highly volatile, makes people very violent, aggressive, really kind of puts them completely who they not really are, but because of the chemical interaction in the body, it really is considered mind altering. So let's have a look here. Now, the irony of this with Karlie and that having the close-knit circle of friends is that in that circle of friends, now I'm not 100% sure whether they were her closest friends or it was just a general gathering of people that knew each other, but certainly I feel she was betrayed on that day. Whether she knew she was taking that toxin or not, yeah, I don't know. I believe there was a betrayal. So I believe the first betrayal happened at that party with the friends, and that would be the first betrayal of 2. Now, if we look at Karlie some more, May 13, 2002, that 13 is also about 13-4 is also about new beginnings, but also endings. It's also a death number. And unfortunately, she does have a 13-4 outcome on her date of birth, which could mean new beginnings. So, for example, if she had left the house that morning, and I believe it was on October 13, had she left that day, packed a bag and run away with money in the bank, then I would say, yes, she started a new beginning. She left the past behind, but I don't believe that is the case. In this case, we've got a death, unfortunately. So, and overall, born in a 4 year, 2002, she was laden with fours. Now, what's interesting here is this is a kind of person that would never run away from home. And I'm going to repeat that. This is the kind of person that would never run away from home. Fours are very homely people. They'd rather be in a home that they know, her home, than in the friend's house, for example. She would feel a lot more secure at home than at a friend's house. That's just her nature. Okay, so we can see it's evident in the and I know it's a little bit retrospective, but when she ran away from the party, that's exactly what I'm talking about. She won't stay at, even if she knew the friends for years, she would rather be at home. And that's why I find it very hard to believe that she actually ran away that morning. And I'm going to show it with the three of them combined, with the father, the stepmother, as well as Karlie. Now, that 9 in the day, so that 13, 4, and the 5, that 9 in the day, this is another creative person. I believe she was highly geared towards education, learning. She had the propensity for learning. She might not be the, or would have become the professor or the lecturer at a university, but she certainly had the propensity for genius. And she certainly had the ability to get good marks and do well in school. Now, I don't know what her actual report cards were like, but I would say this person was, and I've listed it there, brilliance and genius. And with that 4, this tells me this was a very together person. One incident should not determine or paint or categorize a person. I've known someone before that took a LSD drug and completely behaved out of character, went through terrors, went through paranoia. You know, these mind-altering drugs can be highly detrimental. And of course, unfortunately, we've lost a lot of young people to drugs. And the drugs these days with the chemicals, what's that main one that's going around at the moment? Ethanol. I mean, these are highly, highly, highly toxic, dangerous, recreational drugs. And unfortunately, we can't put out a warning enough to say, don't touch chemicals. Never touch chemicals. So that's why, you know, it was a recreational evening. It was a Friday evening. They had some fun. And unfortunately, it didn't pan out well for Karlie. Now, what I'm going to do is look at a comparison between Karlie and her father, Zach. And I want to just bring to your attention the similarity in their numbers. Okay? As mentioned in previous videos, children tend to emulate their parents, either the father or the mother, naturally so, because that's the day they were born, with numbers, and they're almost a reflection for the parent. That's why we have these incidents where parents beat their kids because they've been naughty or whatever, like extreme punishment. And that's in a lot of cases, if you had to look at the numbers behind the parent and the child, in many cases the parent is actually angry with their child, but in a sense they're actually angry with themselves. It's a reflection of themselves. We all go through life lessons, including myself and everyone else. We all go through life lessons. Unfortunately, some don't make it out because of, you know, in this case, chemicals. But effectively, when a parent, especially when there's a lot of abuse or ongoing, it's really just the parent in conflict with themselves, taking it out on their kids. All right, so let's have a look at Karlie and Zach here. Now, we're going to start a trend here. Now, pay attention to the age, the outcome of their ages, 7 and 7. That is going to prove to be very significant on the day of the so-called disappearance, right? So if we look at Karlie and Zach combined, they both have 5s. So Karlie has the 5 in the month. And that's also a very creative 5 as well. People born in May tend to be very artistic, creative, but tend to go through some difficulties in life. But in the main, 5s also speak about diplomacy, or the opposite of diplomacy is like deception, blocking people, creating more problems to themselves. And when I look at Karlie and Zach, they both have 2 4s, they both have a 5, and they both have a 9. Now, I would say that these two would fit like a puzzle. They would complement each other. And I would say we can use the term peas in a pod. However, when you have a situation where there's too many of the same numbers, and let's say between 2 people, when it's good, it's good. And when there's a fight or if there's a disruption, it can be very explosive, more so than normal, and because they share a lot of similar numbers. And it's almost like, for example, children will say things to their parents because they know ultimately they will be forgiven. And that's why, especially within family members, they would also just blurt out certain stuff, which is very, under normal circumstances, would be hurtful, harmful. But because in most cases, most families, they'll take it on the chin, they will resolve it the next day or the next couple of days, but then things will go back to normal. But with Karlie and Zach, they would be a puzzle. They would fit together, they would be harmonious, but when things go wrong, things go wrong. All right, so I just want to bring to your attention the similarities in their numbers as well as the age. So when we bring in Karlie, Zach, and Melissa, now with Melissa, I couldn't find her complete date of birth. I'm not going to use her date of birth that much in the story because there's a bigger story happening here. And this is the story about the 7s. It's very significant that each of their ages add to a 7. Now, again, as mentioned, when numbers are too many, this can create serious problems. Serious problems. And with 7s, in this case, where there's a lot of blaming going on, blame game, who's responsible, you responsible, no, you responsible, a lot of backwards and forwards. And with 7s tend to blame others when in fact the problem lies with themselves. Okay? Now we have a situation here, so let's look at the day that the party happened, October the 12th, 2018. Now already we've got some interesting numbers there. That 11-2 is already going to tell me that either the party went well or the party didn't go well. There was illegal activity or non-illegal activity. And because we know that there was a party, there was drugs being taken, whether it was only marijuana or not, but certainly there was a law being broken. And that 12-3 is all about coming together of people, parties, community, having a good time. And in the month that it happened, the 1, it's all about themselves. So everyone went there wanting to party with everyone else. That brings the 3. Okay. Now that 4 also tells me that 4 plus 2 tells me on that day that yes, it would have been a smallish party, and it would have been actually okay. However, the outcome with that 11-2, which is that 4 and then the 2, which is from the 11-2, something went wrong. And now we know that something did go wrong. That 6 talks about poison. It talks about murder. It talks about a mental earthquake. So that mental earthquake could be Karlie freaking out, could be her going into a paranoid state, having a bad trip, whether it was PCP or LSD or whatever it was, highly toxic, poisonous. And that 6, people with a lot of 6s tend to be obsessive compulsive. So that would be all the paranoia coming in, would be very violent, rage and anger. And we know with the drugs like PCP and even with the toxic drugs that were taken on that day, was poisonous to her system. And that 4 also knocks on Karlie's 4s. She is a 4 life path, and that impacted her directly. Now you'll see in her date of birth, May 13, 2002, there was definitely no 6s in her numbers there. She's not prone to this kind of activity. That's why I say that 5 is more recreational drugs than anything else. I don't think she had an addiction problem. I don't think she would have smoked every day or every weekend or whatever the story is. It was just a time to have fun, supposedly, and it turned out to be poisonous for Karlie, which is the 4, and that 4 plus 2 outcome of the 6. Now, it's also interesting that obviously during the course of that evening, Melissa would have picked up Karlie, and we know she found her running down the street. And I had a friend as well that was so badly on LSD that he was running down the streets screaming crazy, and we were trying to help him. So yeah, I can sympathize with this situation and understand exactly what happened here this night. So now you got Melissa, who was reportedly 34 at the time, with the 7 outcome. Now what we have here is that 6 can be very violent, aggressive, and that's the nature that Karlie was experiencing. I'm not saying she was violent, but completely out of character, OCD, mental earthquake. And that 6 is also about disconnection, and also 6 speaks about family. So here we have the situation where we have this intoxicated young girl, 16, picked up by the parents. Now the family is involved, and that's the 6 as well. Highly volatile situation. Karlie was certainly extremely vulnerable. And of course, in hindsight, it's always easier to say that the parents should have taken her to a hospital, which she should have done. She should have gone to a hospital because some of these drugs can lead to overdose. And in fact, she should have gone to the hospital. So what happened that evening into the next morning? Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, I quite honestly, and I've been going over this, let me tell you, it's probably the longest time I've spent in the background looking at this case before I actually present it, because my initial outcome of this situation was Karlie never left the house that morning. In my opinion, based on imagery as well as the numbers, when that sun rose that morning, or when that morning came round, I believe Karlie was already dead. Before that sun rose that morning, October 13, Karlie was already deceased. And I see that in the 13-4 on the October 13. Now that 13-4 is a death number, pings directly on Karlie's number. I'm going to repeat myself here again. In my opinion, Karlie was deceased before the sun rose the following morning. Okay. Now, when we got a case of 7s, we also have the situation of being trapped or forcibly being held against your will. And that would have happened inside the house. Psychically, I do not pick up Karlie leaving that house that morning at all. The only activity that I see around that house that morning is Zach closing his boot and driving away. The only movement I have that morning is Zach closing his boot and driving away. And he would have driven off alone, because Melissa would have had to stay behind for the other kids. Now, so what actually happened is what we need to find out. And this is what I've been trying to pick up. I believe, so that 6 outcome on October the 12th, there would have been all the stories, let's put it this way. The stories that are coming from the parents, the step parents, let's say, the father and the stepmother report and say that, yeah, she was speaking funny and saying the salad that she was eating was the devil's lettuce and all that nonsense. Right, that would have happened, not a problem. I don't disagree with that at all. We can see that in the 4s of that evening and the 6. But that 6 tells me another story. That 6 tells me a different story. In my opinion, it would have been a very volatile night. But in my opinion, that evening was not as calm as the parents are making it out to be. Yeah, she was lying in bed and we're keeping her calm. That ain't going to happen. This was a highly volatile situation, so much so that it got out of control and became violent. There was anger, rage. In my opinion, Karlie did not wake up the following morning, and I believe it was not of natural causes either. And of course, then the 2 parents had to come together, and this, let me just finish that thought. They had to come together and come up with a plan. Now, the reason why I say that, and I picked this up in other readings, for example, like the John Bonet case, as well as the Madeleine case, and brings up an interesting concept of family versus state. Right, I'll say it again. Family versus state. So, what do I mean by that? Here we have a family situation. There are other kids involved. One kid is in distress. The kid that's in distress, which is obviously Karlie, whether it was an accident or happened in the spur of the moment, and I'll give a final conclusion to this, a death occurred. 6 tells me a death occurred. So the parents had to decide, for the betterment of the family, do we discard of her or do we report it to the authorities? And as we know, the report that came to the authorities was she was missing. Right? Now that 7 again, it pings on the 7s. 7s is about justice or injustice. However, it's also about people who cut corners, whether it's with their income tax, whether it's with business dealings, with 7s in them will get caught and tend to break the law thinking they are not going to get caught. Okay? A law was broken that evening into the next morning. We see the 7 outcome on the supposed missing day. A law had been broken. And that, now I'm looking at October 13, 2018, that 5 and the 2, that 5 tells me whatever was said about that day was bullshit. That 5 tells me whatever was said about what happened was bull dust. Bull dust. And with that 11-2, which is an injustice, it's either do the right thing or the wrong thing. They could have easily have said, or phoned the paramedics and said, Karlie, she was on drugs, she ran through the window and now she's dead, as an example. You know, why didn't they do that? Why didn't the parents phone and say, listen, we've got a child in distress, she needs help, She's going into convulsions. Let's get a paramedic out there quickly. No harm, no foul. Yes, parents would want to protect their family name and protect the family members by trying to sort the problem out internally at home. But when you have a medical condition, and this is what she was going through, Karlie, she was going through an invasive medical issue. That's the force. So much so that it was creating violence, rage, anger. She was effectively having a complete mental breakdown based on and induced by the chemicals, the poison. And this is why I say, when we look at October the 13th, that following morning, that 13-4, she was dead before the sun rose. She did not leave the house, in my opinion. And I don't get an image of her leaving the house. The only image I get of leaving the house is the father closing the boot and driving off. And he actually said to himself, I picked up a message, he actually said to himself when he closed that boot, or we call it a boot here in South Africa. When he closed the boot, he said he is going to regret this later. I believe when he was preparing to take her away in the boot of his car, he said to himself, he is going to regret this later. And you know what I'm going to say? Because they were all in sevens predominantly, and with the other numbers that I see here in the 7th day, this is going to come back and haunt them. This is going to come back and haunt them. So the second injustice, or the second betrayal, one was the friends and the drugs. 2 was from her actual caregivers. Okay? And that's that 11-2 that we're seeing on that 2018. And Zach has compounded 11-2 in the 22-4 in his date of birth. And the outcome of the next day also has the 11-2, the 13-4, and the 1. That 1 pings on Zach. Now, I don't have all of Melissa's details, but there's definitely serious issues going on here. So much so that it got out of control, that they felt they couldn't call the police because by implication they would be then accomplices to murder. So they would have to, let's say, during the course of the evening between midnight and, let's say, 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock before the sun rose, they would have had to hatch up a plan of how they were going to get her out of the house and say she ran away. And I know there's 3 eyewitness accounts, but I'm disputing that wholeheartedly. I'm disputing those. That's when I first looked at this, and I actually looked at the numbers first and then started hearing about these eyewitnesses. And to me, there's no way, there is no way she left that house that morning. I believe between midnight and 4 a.m. or even 5 a.m., they would have hatched a plan what to do with Karlie. And I believe Melissa would have been at the epicenter of the death. That a tragedy occurred on this evening. Now, with those 3 in the day, outcome day for Melissa, that's all about control, and this would have irked her beyond control. 1, she could not have controlled the situation at all. And 2, this would have just put her out of sorts, which ended up in the death of Karlie. And I believe before the sun rose the next morning, and I'm going to repeat it again, Karlie was already dead, unfortunately. I haven't even gone beyond October 14th. Well, I did on my preliminary slides, but there's no way. There's no way. And if you see those 7s pinging on the 7s of the day that she went missing, or supposedly went missing, all 7s, when you have too many same of numbers, It's like with anything, too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing, whatever the saying is. But in this case, you've got all these sevens, and it screams injustice or justice. They should have called the paramedics, or Melissa should have taken her directly to the local clinic or the local hospital immediately. And I will just put an asterisk there saying, yes, the families would want to contain this. They don't want to get the word out that the daughter had a bad drug episode, bad trip, whatever it was. But hindsight is 2020. And unfortunately, when you are dealing with the heavily toxic chemical drugs that are existing these days, hospital should have been the first point of course. So, unfortunately, we have a situation here where family could not contain the situation on their own and resulted in the death of a young teenager. And I guess we could say there was a third injustice in that, and that's all the sevens, that then now created a missing persons case to cover their asses. Now, I'm not saying Zach is the cause, but I did see an interview with Karlie's mother saying that Zach was obviously intoxicated. Look, we all have a couple of drinks on the end of a Friday, no harm, no foul. But when you bring all of this in under one roof, that sex screams. That sex in this situation is like a bomb. It's like a mental earthquake, but it's like a bomb in the house of the family. So much so that it resulted in the death of Karlie. Now, ultimately, whether we know exactly who did it or not, ultimately, Zach and Melissa are responsible, whether directly or indirectly, and I don't want to point too many fingers, but the two of them are ultimately responsible for the care of the child, as well as response in getting assistance for the child. And secondly, or thirdly, then now a cover-up happens where a plan was hatched. It was very convenient to only call the biological mother, I believe it was way past 9 a.m. That gave them plenty of time to get their story together, that Zach got up in the evening or in the morning at 3 a.m. You heard them talking in the room. Okay, she's calm. Very convenient. Very convenient. That Melissa got up at, 5:30 or 5:45. Yeah, she was sleeping and the other kids were sleeping. Very convenient. Very convenient. And then Zach drove off in terror that morning before the sun rose, before the kids got up, and would spin the story. Guys, your sister has run away. And let me tell you, with Karlie's fours, that is a homebody. That is someone that would rather, and I'm going to just say it, and I'm not being funny, she would rather die at home than die at a friend's house. Do you know what I mean? She would rather be at home, even if it was miserable, and I'm not even going to go there between her relationship with Karlie and Melissa. I don't feel that was a harmonious relationship at all. At all. In fact, I think it was quite the opposite. So with Karlie and Zach, they had a harmonious relationship in the main. But as I mentioned in the beginning, if it goes volatile, it goes volatile. Whereas with Melissa and Karlie, I don't think that was a harmonious relationship at all. I think Melissa was too much of a control freak to even feel emotions. And ironically, she is born in February, but I believe the need to be overpowering, over-domineering, control freak, control maniac was more in line with who Melissa is than being a mom. Now, the irony of it 3 years is about motherhood, is about being a mother. But I think in this case, because she was trying to assert her dominance in the family and having their own biological kids with Zach, Yeah, I don't think she would have given Karlie the same emotional aptitude that she would have given her own biological kids. So, unfortunately, we have a tragic story of a young teenager having fun on a Friday night, tries or takes the wrong chemical, and it turns bad. There are many of those cases. The chemicals these days is ridiculous. We even know police dying because they find fentanyl in people's vehicles. It is highly, highly volatile. And that sixth outcome of the day of the party, it speaks about poison, speaks about murder, mental earthquake, violence, rage, anger, which cannot be contained at all unless they went to the hospital. So Melissa and Zach tried to contain the situation. The situation got out of hand. And unfortunately, they covered up the death of a young teenager for their own benefit, and the benefit mainly for the kids and family, and that they would just let one go in the sake of the others. It's the same with John Bonet and Madeleine McCann. The whole is greater than the one. And I believe that is what's happened here. I will say again, Karlie, I will say again, Karlie did not wake up that morning, that Saturday morning. She did not wake up Saturday morning.